countdown to the last comic shop in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, it is now time for more of the Last Comic Shop! It's so nice to have you back at the shop, Mikey. It really is.
I never left.
I know. I found the sleeping bag underneath the counter. You don't have to tell us.
I live behind boxes of Archie comics.
Yes, that's right. We are opening up the shop to Archie comic fans. So if you love your Jughead, come on inside.
And who doesn't love your Jughead? We're keeping the shop open for the oldies that love those Jugheads.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever read the Jughead, The Hunger from the horror line?
No, I never did. What's that one about? My co-host, Chad Smith?
I don't know. I didn't read it either, but it had those Francesco Francofia covers, and it was glorious. I don't read Jughead.
You know who read Jughead? Ethan. We should have had Ethan on. Ethan loved the Jughead. In any case, I am Ethan's brother, Andy Larson, the host with the most. I'm joined by Ethan's cousin, J.A. Scott, as well as somebody that's not related to Ethan at all, and that's Chad Smith, as well as Mikey Wood, who's, I don't know, I think Ethan's illegitimate child from the future. I don't...
It's a whole cable strife Nathan Summers kind of hunk.
He's got a cyborg garb. You can't see it.
I just like when Mikey heads out with his chromed out armor with all the spikes.
I like it when Mikey gets like 6 different variant action figures of the same stuff.
That's right.
Because they needed all of them. It's like, here's Mikey in a sombrero.
Yes.
From
yes.
Chi-Chi's.
Yeah.
Chi-Chi.
I liked Mexicable a whole lot. Mexicable was my favorite.
All right. Well, we got to get to actually the show. Unfortunately, we don't have a book to read this week. You caught us in the middle of spring cleaning. Like, I told you that I found the sleeping bag underneath the desk. That's because I'm trying to clean out the place. It's the springtime, right? It's finally nice. And we decided to clean out the shop. So, like, I was throwing out old accordions and some issues of a US 1 that I didn't want anymore. What are you guys throwing out?
Not these copies of Super Pro. That's coming back, baby. I can feel it.
That's true. One of these days, I have every issue of Young Heroes in Love. I like those. That's a good book, man.
Yeah, I can't get rid of that.
I was going to ask J.A. whether he wanted all of these old McDonald's cups from the Batman Returns with the Frisbee disc lids.
I just want the disc lids. I don't care about the cups anymore, but give me those disc lids.
Okay. We'll put those aside here. But in any case, I was thinking that while we're cleaning out some stuff, another thing that we have to clean out are the last of the interviews from Baltimore Comic Con. You know, that thing that happened like 6 months ago. And we've been like slowly drizzling it out to all of our fans.
We talked to a lot of people. It was lots of fun.
19, in fact. 19 people. Jay told us never to talk to anybody ever again.
Yeah, you got to talk to me. Talk to me. I'm somebody.
Okay, well, we'll talk to you the next week's show. But in any case, on this week's show, we've got some great interviews. And we're going to start off with Jerry Ordway. This was a really great interview. We went up and wanted to talk to him about Death of Superman, and we never got to it. As you'll see, Chad was really interested in hearing about the Batman '89 movie adaptation. And we got some great stories. It is!
And that adaptation was fabulous.
And they did the ending before they knew what the ending of the movie was.
No. Let Jerry Ordway tell the story.
All right.
Here's Jerry Ordway's interview from Baltimore Comic Con. Hey, this is Andy Larson from The Last Comic Shop, and we're here with Jerry Ordway. And Jerry, it seems like you've had a really great Baltimore Comic Con so far. Every time I've come over, it looks like you've been busy. You know, you do those commissions at the shows. The first question I always ask is, what was your most requested commissioned character?
Yeah, I really don't do too many anymore because I like to be able to not have to work in the room too much. So I take like 4 of them a day, and year by year, I talk to other creators and they're like, you're not charging enough. And I noticed the one thing about kind of raising the prices a little bit is that people then, I used to get weird requests like characters that I've never even heard of that I wasn't associated with. Someone would say, draw Betty Boop or something. It was stuff like that. And I guess that makes sense that could be an offshoot of your underpricing, so someone can just go rando, you know?
Right.
So now I generally get JSA, Captain Marvel, Shazam, Superman,
All right.
you know, that type of thing. And I did a little smattering of each of them. I did a couple of JSA characters, and always enjoy when I don't have to look up a costume.
Yes.
You know?
Yes, it
I
always
know
helps.
Yeah, like Dr. Fate. Yep, I got that. Green Lantern. Sure, I got that.
So, what's your favorite member of the JSA to draw?
I like to draw the Flash. I mean, there's something challenging about that kind of, you know, doughboy helmet.
Right.
Because it has to sit right, and you know when you're sketching it, if you don't have it tilted right, it just looks really stupid.
Really?
I mean, it really does. And you know, all credit to John Wesley Shipp and that version on TV, because they did a good job with it. You know, that helmet does not look dumb. It fits. But you know, in the comics, Jay Garrick would have a slightly tilted, but it was an artistic thing because they wanted to show his face. So depending on what angle they drew it, it always seemed like it was leaning back.
Right.
You know, like kind of casually.
It also gave him a little bit of an edge too. Like he was like, "Hey, you know, I'm wearing this metal frisbee, but hey, it looks cool. At least it's somewhat sideways."
If someone's throwing rocks at our head, I'm covered, guys. You know.
We need better reception. I'm your guy.
That's right. Well, like I was saying with like Green Lantern, you know, you have the Golden Age Green Lantern. His vulnerable to wood.
Yes.
And he has that collar that goes up, which clearly, you know, the ring must help him see behind him. You know what I mean? Like give him some kind of radar warning, because otherwise people could just come behind him and hit him with a baseball bat.
Right, a Louisville Slugger right to the back of that Lucha Libre collar.
Right. Who needs a supervillain when you can just take him out? You know, Babe Ruth. There's Babe Ruth. Look out. He's going after Green Lantern.
Watch out for splinters.
Yeah.
It's true.
And Lou Gehrig's with him. Oh, damn.
Well, the second question we always ask to folks that we haven't talked to on the last comic shop is, I've found that most of you were comic fans at one point.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I always ask, do you remember what the first comic book that you had? Or was really the first comic you were like, yes, this was...
Well, it's a difference between the first comic that I read and the first comic that I truly cared for.
Okay, let's go with the cared for.
The cared for. Well, the cared for, I discovered Marvel Comics in June of 1960, or actually end of May in 1967. My brother, my mother, and I were going to my older brother's college graduation. My older brother was 16 years older.
Okay.
And we were getting a train to Colorado. So the train station had a comic rack. My mom gave my brother Joel and me $1, and $1 bought a lot of 12-cent comics.
Okay.
And we immediately went to Marvel because we'd watched the cartoon where they had the Marvel Superheroes show. So I bought stuff that wasn't on the cartoon, like Daredevil, Spider-Man. Those became favorites of mine.
So you were like the Gene Colan
Daredevil, yeah. And I can tell you, Spider-Man, it was issue 50, him walking away from his costume in the garbage can, which blew my mind. Like, wait, can a superhero quit? And with Daredevil, and it's still vivid in my brain, it was like 3 gangster types. There are 2 guys grabbing Daredevil by the arms, and the other gangster in the foreground pulling his mask off his head, and he's got the big, gigantic sunglasses on under the mask. And as a kid, I was just shy of 10 years old. I remember thinking, like, wow, that's fascinating. How do the glasses work under the mask? You don't see them when the mask is on.
It's incredible. They just fold right in.
It's the magic of drawing, you know? But
so from those first issues, do you remember the first series that you got maybe on the regular, or you were like, no?
All of those from the minute, the minute we found
it. After you got on that train,
I was a Marvel maniac. And the funny thing is, we got to Colorado, and it turned out that the newsstand in Milwaukee had the previous month. So by the time we were in Colorado, the drugstore was right by our hotel had the next issues.
Nice.
So we were kind of spoiled too, because it was like, well, now we have to wait a whole month. But I remember reading those things. My brother really gravitated toward Thor immediately. I liked them all, but I remember not liking the Fantastic Four because it seemed too scientific to me.
All right.
And it was an issue with the Sentry or something like that. But again, your kid brain being what it is. I liked the Daredevil because he wasn't powered. I liked Spider-Man because he seemed normal even though he was powered.
Right. You gravitated towards the street level characters.
But I also didn't, I never thought like Spider-Man's a quitter. That's how I first saw him. He's walking away from his job.
Oh yeah.
That didn't stick with me though.
Spidey used to be a hothead, a quitter.
I know.
All that
well,
stuff.
see, the cool thing was And again, for anybody nowadays, you don't get a sense of this, but they used to put the footnotes whenever a character reappeared. Stan Lee's little note
Smiling
would
Stan.
say, Electro appeared in issue 13 or whatever.
Right.
That gave me an incentive to then try to find back issues.
Right.
It was like, well, I need to read these other issues because this is all part of this big story. And then, of course, when you read all the Spider-Man stuff, not that I got every issue, but I got enough of them. It was like Spider-Man was always trying to quit. He goes to a psychiatrist. He definitely had kind of real-world anxiety problems, which is kind of interesting for early 60s, mid-60s.
It was why Marvel was kind of groundbreaking at the time.
Oh, yeah.
They were willing to say, let's put some realism in those.
And the problem, too, the DC Comics if you look at any website that would have covers from the 1950s, you got a whole page of covers to look at, and covers from the 1960s, they were virtually the same.
Right.
And you compare them to Marvel, and Marvel looked like they were coming from outer space. They were so different.
Yes.
Even coloring, they were just different. It was clear this is not your dad's comic book,
Right. Well, at that point, DC had survived the seduction of the innocent trial, everything in the 1950s.
Well, and
they were willing to play it safe.
They were trying to be very conservative.
They were the standard.
And I will admit that I read Batman. My mom knew I loved the Batman TV show. But then I felt like, well, when you're a kid, you're anxious to grow up.
Right.
So you're anxious to also leave stuff behind. So with me, Batman TV show, when it hit 1966, I was just maybe a year and a half younger. But by the time I saw the Marvel stuff, it was like, well, Batman, that's for kids. And I was, really not that much older. But I bought a lot of the checkerboard,
Yes.
DC's, the Batman Detective and stuff. But they never had that same impact as reading those first issues of Marvel. They were just night and day.
Well, that's amazing because I know you mostly from the DC stuff and your DC work. I know that the first comic books that I really read of yours and fell in love with was the Powers of Shazam series.
Yeah.
Because simply put, I was a huge fan of the Adventures of Captain Marvel movie serial.
Oh, yeah,
I
that's
had that
great.
on VHS, and you were one of the first creators to basically
I am a character, too.
to take Captain Marvel and kind of try to put some of that 1940 stuff into it, basically the fact that there was the radio tower and kind of bring in Black Adam and make him more of an integral part of the whole Shazam mythos. Yeah. So how did you start working, I guess, on Powers of Shazam? How did you get involved with that project?
I was working on Superman.
Right.
And I'd done the Batman movie comic, the adaptation.
Oh, Chad has got questions about that.
Well, my editor on that, Jonathan Peterson, had inherited Shazam to launch, and he hired Byrne. John Byrne was going to do Shazam, was going to reboot. And unfortunately, John and DC had some kind of dispute, so John didn't do it.
Right.
So my friend Jonathan, he says, look, would you consider doing it? What if we did it as a standalone with the idea that you could do a series later? So you could do this maybe in between while you're still working on Superman or whatever, and we'll do it. He said, I'll loan you my Laserdisc of The Adventures of Captain Marvel.
Okay.
You can watch the serial, and we'll find a way in on it. But he said I think it was his idea, was the idea to do it as if we were doing an adaptation of a Captain Marvel movie.
Right.
So it would be a complete story. And back then, DC didn't do a lot of collections. You would do a monthly comic, and it felt kind of like you'd see somebody do a original graphic novel, and I was a little jealous. You didn't have time to do it when you were working on a monthly book.
Right.
So this was something where I could actually do something nice. I got them to agree to let me do the paint, full color without. It was watercolor.
Right.
So every page was a full color watercolor page.
It's beautiful.
And I'm very proud of it. But so we got them to agree to this, and I started working on it actually in 1991.
Okay.
And I worked in between. I shifted just to writing Superman. Tom Grummett came on to Superman.
Right.
I was writing it, and then I was doing this as a side project. So a few pages here and there, and a couple of years passed, and DC was still willing to wait because I was working with DC, and so it was just one of those things where I worked at it slowly and eventually got it done. So it came out in 94, and then DC was wanting to do a regular monthly series a year later. One was like a good entree because you're just setting up the audience for, here's the new Captain Marvel.
Right.
He's not that different, but again, I took elements that had been plugged in years later, like Black Adam. Black Adam really didn't get introduced until the 50s.
Right.
And he was only in really one story before
tail
they
end of
sent
that
him
faucet.
off into space.
Right.
Yeah. So I was able to just put everything in its correct place.
Yes.
And play with a little bit of the idea of Fawcett City being kind of lost in time. Mm-hmm. Like a bygone era. And then we had explanation for it in the series as well, that the wizard had cast a spell over it so that time not only went slower, but it was a logical excuse to have something that looked distinctly different.
Yes. And it does.
I was going to say, speaking of looking distinctly different, you adapted your style a little bit for that Shazam book.
Yeah. Well,
what made you decide to go that route?
Well, because I was doing it in color. I mean, when you're drawing black and white comics, you can imply where you would like some kind of lighting effect or whatever, but when you're actually working in color, you realize you have to think it through. Like, okay, there's a light source in the room. Is the light source of a wall sconce? Is it an overhead light? Is it coming from a lamp or from multiple sources?
Okay.
So you don't necessarily think of that when you're not coloring your own comic work.
Oh.
On top of that, by doing it in watercolor, my inspiration for the look of the comic was the Fleischer Superman cartoons.
Oh, very nice.
And the funny thing about that is that the Fleischer Superman cartoons that we had available to us in like 89 to 91 too, were all old prints that had been either on VHS or whatever, but it had been like kind of in public domain, really. It was kind of an orphaned kind of thing. So the quality of them was dark. In other words, the color palette, the film had darkened over the years or whatever. I didn't realize that was the case. I always thought that was their color palette. But in essence, the film quality had darkened, so you were getting this kind of really interesting palette where things looked more complex. Like it wasn't blue, a sky was blue with a little bit of green in it, you know?
Yeah.
So I love the color of it. I love the palette. So that was what I try to emulate. And then now, recently, someone had done like a remastering of like the Mechanical Monsters.
Yes.
And they basically took away the age and the yellowing of the film itself, and it's kind of bright. And I was like, wow, it kind of looks wrong to me. Although I understand you could see more detail. I guess it's the same thing when they like in the Grand Central Station. Nobody knew there was this beautiful mural on the ceiling, until they started getting all the grime and cigarette smoke of 80 years off of it.
Well, no, I agree, because I had the same VHS tapes growing up of the Superman, and there was a little bit of like a film noir-y quality to it that made things were shadowed in gray.
A lot of
little
stuff
bit.
happened at night. A lot of those stories also took place in the city at night, like the Mechanical Monsters come through and they rob the bank at night or whatever. So the actual palette was interesting in that way.
Well, one other thing that I wanted to ask you before we get into Superman, because again, we want to get Superman and Batman. We've got a couple other things for you, but my last question is really, you got a chance to do both Superman and Captain Marvel.
Right.
Now, I know who I prefer.
Right.
But who do you prefer? Or are they just
I like them
apples
both.
and orange?
I do like them both, yeah.
Okay.
I think the run on Captain Marvel is more of a favorite because I kind of did it more myself, whereas Superman, even though I did a lot of story stuff on Superman was a group project.
Right.
And it's not like you could go, I wrote that. You know what I mean? It was more complicated to say I came up with this or I came up with that, because there's 8 other people in a room or something.
Right.
With Shazam, I knew was my own thing.
Yeah.
So, I think I'd also, as a writer, I felt like I was at the point where I'd matured enough and I knew kind of what I was doing by that point that I could do it myself.
Sure. Well, it was. I've always liked Captain Marvel a little bit more, just because of the child wish fulfillment portion.
Oh yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, nothing's better than being a kid and being able to yell something and then all of a sudden be the most powerful mortal ever and be able to jump off things. But Chad's got some questions.
Cool.
Yep. Speaking of childhood wish fulfillment. I was around 8 or 9 years old at the time of the Batman movie when that was coming out. And honestly, that is the big thing that got me to transition from collecting baseball cards into comic books. And I know you worked on the Batman 89 movie adaptation.
Yep.
What was that like, first working on the book itself and then being part of that pop culture craziness where you guys had the different ending and everything you're working with?
Well, when I was doing Superman, again, Jonathan Peterson was the editor of the Batman movie adaptation. Jonathan was also Mike Carlin's assistant editor for a couple of years on the Superman books. So we were good friends. And one of the things that Jonathan had edited the Superman Quest for Peace movie adaptation that Kurt Swan drew.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And John Byrne penciled the cover. I inked the cover. I mean, he did movie adaptation. He also did like Alien Nation, which was a movie that James Cameron had written and Gail Ann Hurd had produced it or whatever. But we talked about how in the 50s and 60s, there were some really great movie adaptations. John Buscema had maybe done Spartacus and one of the Hercules, beautiful stuff. In the 80s, you had Al Williamson doing the Star Wars stuff for Marvel.
Right,
adaptations.
Howard Chaykin,
and you had
too.
Chaykin, doing the comic thing, but we're thinking of more of like a complete magazine style, what Marvel was doing with those, like they did Meteor. They did a whole bunch of movie adaptations that were beautiful because they had really good production value. They were full color and that. So when Batman came along, Jonathan was, of course, then he is editing the movie stuff. He said, we had talked about this for years. You said, we should be the guys to bring the prestige back to the movie adaptations, because what had happened in the intervening couple of years is that nobody wanted to draw them because they were not going to pay a royalty. They were, like kind of, who cares? They would always wind up being whoever wasn't busy would draw it.
Wow, that's crazy.
So he and I both were on that same page. It's like, we want to make this special again. And when we started hearing and seeing stuff about Batman and Nicholson's being cast and Keaton, and you saw like little snippets of the costume stuff as early as October of '88, it was like, okay, I could see doing this. And then coincidentally, I went to a convention in the United Kingdom, London, and part of DC they took freelancers to the set as it was being built. And I missed out on it because I wasn't there on the day before the show.
Aww.
So Jeanette Kahn was nice enough to allow my wife and I to go on our own.
That's even better.
A couple days after the show. And we got to see, the buildings. We got to see the car. We got to see the costumes. And by that point, I was like, yeah, Jonathan, I'm in. This is going to be awesome. The downside is that it was a tremendous amount of pressure work.
Right, it's very high profile, but
Yeah.
you really knocked it out of the park.
Yeah.
Now, was there secrecy around? Like, were you able to see like the dailies, or how did you end up?
We saw a lot of. They have a set photographer just take pictures with a 35 millimeter camera, and that was a lot of it was for reference, like to make sure here's what the set looked like, here's where that coffee mug was, and what have you. So we got a lot of that early on because there was a tremendous amount of pre-production work done. But then once they started filming, within a month, they started throwing the script into just the rewriting stuff.
Right, yeah, as they do.
That was when it got tricky for us because we didn't get good stills from that stuff. We would get contact sheets of 1 by 1 square inch, what used to be a color slide, they would do a black and white Xerox of it. So it was really hard to see details.
So did you guys know about the revised ending, or just decide to go with the one you had?
Denny O'Neil at a certain point said, I don't want to do any more rewrites. You guys take care of it, because he didn't want to keep going playing with it. So Jonathan and I would go through the contact sheets. We'd look at revised script pages and try to figure out where these new scenes were happening. So some of it was guesswork. And when we had to finish the book by April, at the first week of April. It didn't come out until June.
Right.
Because there was a lead time, print time, and all that. So when we saw the movie in theaters, we hadn't seen any of the model work for like the Batwing. We knew what it looked like, but we didn't see the composite with the city above 40 feet because the movie set only goes to 40 feet. And then they did paintings, matte paintings, to make it look grand. So when we watched it, like an early preview, not a Hollywood premiere or anything, but it was a screening a week before it opened. We sat next to each other, and every time we got something right, we'd see something we didn't know, and we guessed right, we would high five. And we got a few things wrong that they just was edited out. Like we had Alexander Knox wearing the cape. He was covering for Bruce. that was edited out. There were a few things that were like changed, but
that's part of the charm too of getting that adaptation and being able to see that stuff.
Yeah, it's almost like an Elseworlds version of Batman '89. And
or it's the non-director's cut.
That's right.
The artist cut.
It has its own your own stamp on it. It
Yeah.
really is. It's something different than just watching the movie.
But it was. Everybody thinks that movie was a guaranteed hit, but I guarantee you, everybody at Warner Brothers was sweating bullets until it opened big because they had a lot invested.
Dropped, people went crazy for the trailer.
No, but that still doesn't mean the movie's going to do well because it was a really crowded summer. People don't remember that movie came out. There was I believe was an Indiana Jones 3. There was a James Bond movie. There was a Star Trek movie. There was a whole bunch that came out boom, boom, boom in that season. I think James Bond might have come out in May. Batman was June. Then you had, like I said, you had James Bond, Star Trek. It was a crazy front-loaded summer. So everybody was nervous until it opened big. And then, of course, we knew it would be a big hit.
There you go.
But it was an expensive movie for them, too. So now, I mean, when we were there, we were like, oh, my God, this is big. And you could tell it was big because we planned and worked with the DC's circulation director to get the comic in multiple places, mainly in the movie theater.
That's awesome.
So it was going to be in the movie theater opening night, and Warner Brothers got cold sweats, and they said, well, we don't want it to seem like we're hawking comic books at the theater, so they wouldn't let us sell, or wouldn't let DC sell the comic until after the opening weekend in theaters. But it's still, a lot of people bought it there because comic stores weren't that well known, and they had the little comic store locator number at the back of the Batman movie. So that became kind of like it really was like an entree to the entire comic, direct market.
It worked on me. And once everything came out and was that success, did you have like bragging rights around the office where you like look at a Norm Brayfogle and be like, yeah, I got the adaptation?
No, but you know what? We got a big check, or I got a big check because it sold really well. So I got a big enough check. Normally, I forget what it was, but it was enough that when I took it to the bank to deposit, they had to bring the manager out to look at it. Like, I'm depositing, and I'm not like asking for cash. So
not right away. Just put it in the bag.
That impressed me to a degree. Like, gee, what do I look like? I was,
I'd like all of this in sacks of money with a giant green dollar sign on it.
I need these in. Well, can I get these all in Lincoln pennies? But you knew it was a big deal, and then it became like a big deal over that whole summer. I did comic conventions with Jerry Robinson, was a guest of honor at San Diego, Chicago, Atlanta. It was great fun to be part of like that big popular, popular pop culture thing. Yeah.
Yes, the zeitgeist for sure. Well, we didn't even talk about Death of Superman, but I think that might have to be for another interview some other time. Jerry, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us on The Last Comic Shop.
Thank you very much.
We hope the best for you in future.
Thank you.
All right.
See you again.
And we are back, and that confirms it. The only Batman is Michael Keaton. Nobody else comes close. I don't care that Christopher Nolan and all that, whatever. He's no Michael Keaton.
Wow. That is a hot take.
No, it's not. No, that's a normal take. The best Batman and the best Batmobile. Is it the best bat suit? No.
Well, I mean, it wasn't the best costume either because it didn't have the bat nipples. In any case, what we do got is more interviews coming up right after these commercial breaks. So stay tuned, more Last Comic Shop. We got Alex Saviak and Ron Marz coming up right after these messages.
I was going to recommend making a joke about going from bat nipples to milking more of these interviews.
What happens when 20-something Madison is zapped into old-time radio shows? No technology.
I want to go to voicemail.
No Starbucks.
Don't call yourself a coffee shop if you only sell drip coffee.
And no one is PC.
I don't need no lip from.
Were you about to say woman? because I'm wearing a gun and I have no idea how to use it.
Madison on the Air serves to highlight the way we were and the way we are today, with original radio drama scripts adapted to include the modern-day Madison as she joins famous characters from radio's past, including Sergeant Joe Friday.
Just the facts, ma'am. I've never actually said that.
Marshal Matt Dillon.
We're not having a shootout with a 10-year-old kid.
I'm too woke to be a part of this.
Superman.
I didn't realize how cold it would be flying like this.
I have to get into the higher atmosphere.
And many more. Visit us on the web at madisonontheair.com or find us pretty much any place podcasts can be found.
You talk so old-timey. I have no idea what you said, but it's adorbs.
Hi, this is Chad from the Last Comic Shop podcast, here with Alex Saviuk. Is it Saviuk?
Yes.
I apologize. I read your name when I was 9 years old and just made it up in my head.
I hear you.
And so you have been a Spider-Man artist extraordinaire in so many ways, shapes, and forms, whether it was doing where I first noticed your work on Web of Spider-Man, whether it's doing the Spider-Man comic strip in the newspapers, or whether it was even doing some of the all-ages books. And it seems like you were just all over the place with Spider-Man. The guy, whenever they needed somebody, you seemed to serve admirably. So I'm curious, as a Spider-Man artist, who are some of your favorite Spider-Man rogues?
Spider-Man rogues, villains? Yeah. Okay, well, put it this way. Whenever I think of the rogues gallery of Spider-Man, I always go back to the first, I'm going to say roughly around the first year and a half, 2 years that Spider-Man came to be, when it seemed like Steve Ditko and Stan Lee created a new villain each and every issue, and one seemed to be more powerful or diabolical than the next. In issue number 1 of all issues, when you want to test Spider-Man's mettle, as they say, you have the Chameleon, who's just a guy that changes faces. But then all of a sudden, in the second issue, you got the Vulture and some aliens, and then all of a sudden you got Dr. Octopus and Sandman and Dr. Doom and the Lizard and Electro and the Enforcers and Mysterio, Kraven the Hunter, the Green Goblin gets introduced, and it just seemed like it was nonstop. Those guys just kept coming out of the woodwork from the minds of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. So I'd say those guys are probably, for me, the most famous, although I would say currently, obviously, the obvious ones are, Venom and Carnage.
Right. They're relatively later additions, and very few rogues have stuck in the way that the Stan and Steve characters did. Now, when I first encountered your work, one of my favorite storylines was when some of those bad guys turned good. I don't know if you remember drawing Harry Osborn as Green Goblin and the Molten Man teaming up with Spider-Man.
I think it was in Web of Spider-Man 47, and the only reason I remember that is because that was a pivotal issue for Harry Osborn turning into the Green Goblin, when I think in the final panel of that story, Harry was in his, attic or wherever, and he pulls out the mask from wherever it was of the Goblin. Right. And now, I can't remember what the backstory was, why Harry was turning nuts and becoming the Green Goblin, but it was fun to see him back in action,
Andy just reminded me about Parallel Lives. What was it like working on that story that ended up being so pivotal with the whole Spider-Man-Mary Jane relationship?
Well, number one for me, the first appeal of that was the fact that it was going to be my first graphic novel.
Okay.
And I really enjoyed working with Jerry Conway already on the Web of Spider-Man. So to follow up and do a graphic novel with Jerry was great. And knowing that we're delving into certain origin pieces that I guess were never explained before. Basically, I had no idea that Mary Jane knew that Peter was Spider-Man when she saw him crawling up the side of his house early on in the story. And she goes, oh my goodness, but she never mentioned it until, I guess, Peter told her, but she already knew.
Right. The funny part about that was, as a Spider-Man fan, I would go back and read the original Spider-Man run, and if you read it with that knowledge, it all tracks. Like, it seems like Mary Jane knows, and she's making excuses for him.
Those early issues with John Romita when they're all at the coffee shop or something.
Right.
And everybody would be like, where's Peter? And she'll be like, he's around somewhere. Or, oh, he's doing this and that. It all makes sense. She knew, and she was just covering for him. And it's amazing how that all came together. Now, last time that I talked with you, Alex, was a couple years back at New York Comic Con, and you were telling me, was it because of Parallel Lives that you ended up ultimately catching Stan Lee's eye for the comic strip? Because I know eventually you worked with Stan Lee on the comic strip, but how did you get involved with that?
Oh, well, it just so happened that my contract at Marvel was up, and I was already freelancing for Topps Comics doing the X-Files. And Ralph Macchio, one of the editors up there at Marvel, called me up out of the blue, I guess, and unless maybe did they try other people and they said no because they're too busy? But at any rate, they came to me and he said, listen, there's this guy named Fred Kita, who's an old-time artist, okay, probably even from the 40s, who's been filling in on the Sundays for Stan. And Stan got him to start doing those fill-ins like a year and a half ago. And finally, Fred said, hey, Stan, I'm trying to retire here and I'm doing you a favor, but I can't seem to retire because I keep working on this Spider-Man strip. I want to get off, finally. And so now they were short a Spider-Man Sunday artist, and Ralph called me up. If you're interested, and I said, sure. I figured, well, I'm not doing any mainstream comics at the time, but I can work with Stan Lee and even keep my name in there, even if I'm just doing the one page a week. And I put some samples together, some comics that I had drawn, got a package and a cover letter, and I sent it out to Stan. And basically what happened was, this is the day we're talking 1997, and we did not have, digital phones and recorders and all that stuff, but we still had audio cassette tapes. And so I come home from shopping one day, and there's a message on my machine, and it's Stan Lee. And he said, hey, listen, it doesn't pay that much, but think of the glory. And I said, okay, well, that sounds like Stan, all right. I said, sure. And actually, when he said it didn't pay that much, I guess he wasn't aware of what the rates were in comics anymore at that time, because what the Sunday page paid was what I was getting at the time that I was still in comics, at the Marvel, and even when I was doing the X-Files.
Right.
So
the syndicated strips were the way to go.
And I figured, oh, well, what the heck? I'm not losing any money here by doing this. And again, it keeps my hand at drawing Spider-Man and the whole bit. And pretty much that's how it started. My first Spider-Man Sunday was for, I think it was somewhere in May of 1997. And I basically got in. I mean, Fred Kita didn't even wait until the end of the storyline. I got in the middle of a
He wanted to retire.
Yeah, he said, hey, I don't know how old he was at that particular point in time, okay? But yeah, he wanted to get out, and it was in the middle of a Kingpin storyline, so I got the Xeroxes, I guess, of the prior weeks. Pretty much how I got started. So I was getting script pages every 2 weeks. I would do 2 Sundays and send them in. Via FedEx.
Yeah, so I was curious about how different was that from knowing that you had a whole book to tell a story versus only a couple panels. Was it an easier gig, or was it more challenging, or was it just a different animal altogether?
It was a different animal. The more challenging aspect of it was when, in a comic book, if, let's say, just for a change of pace, you want to show Spider-Man climbing up a building, you go, okay, let's do a big vertical panel.
Right.
And we'll show him climbing up the building. There's people down on the ground in the foreground and pointing up or whatever. In a newspaper strip, you've got the same format day in and day out. And so if I want to draw him climbing up the building, I still have to do it that way, in a rectangular panel, whatever. And as Jim Shooter once said, if you have a 6-panel grid, the top third of it is for captions and dialogue, which means now you have 2/3, which looks like a widescreen frame, which almost rivals what you see on, let's say, in a movie theater.
Right.
And that's the way he wanted artists to approach it. Hey, don't worry about a 6-panel grid. You are doing something in this particular screen format because you got to leave room for the copy.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I approached it. It wasn't cinematic in a sense, but the story flowed, and again, up to me to make sure that things flowed from panel to panel. And the only drawback, I think, was that in just drawing the Sundays, there was always a blurb in panel 6 that would say, let's say you had Spider-Man facing an antagonist at the end panel, and it says, next week, the aftermath. And you go, okay, the aftermath. So then I read what's going on during the week, and in that whole week of 6 dailies, Spider-Man fights the bad guy, and then my first panel for the following Sunday is the cops taking the bad guy away. So I'm going, wow, I missed the whole fight. And Larry got to draw all this fun stuff, and I didn't get involved on the fun stuff then until 2003, when they had asked me to fill in on a week of dailies to do inks because John Tartaglione, the current inker that had been doing it for quite a while, was already, I guess, in his 80s, but he had to go into the hospital for what they called a procedure. And that was in February of 2003. And so when he passed, they just called me up and said, hey, would you be interested? And I said, yeah, of course. That being said, now I got to, if not pencil the dailies, which I didn't do, but at least when I was inking them, I got to see what was going on between Sunday to Sunday. So I felt like I was still part of it.
Right.
And then, I guess towards the end, in the 2018, the year that Stan did pass, Larry finally decided to retire from penciling the dailies at 87 in, I guess, May or June of that year. And so they said, well, would you want to pencil them too? I said, yeah. So all of a sudden I thought I had this dream gig of penciling and inking the dailies, penciling the Sundays, and Stan was going to live to be 100. But it never happened. He just, unfortunately, I think one of the main reasons that he lost so much of himself is that he was married for 70 years to the same person. And his wife passed away the year before, and Stan was never the same. He was, I always tell people, he became half Stan after that. You know, as skinny and as frail as he looked, he always seemed to be so jovial and full of life and energy, and he lost all that once Joni passed away, unfortunately. And people were concerned, his friends, his colleagues, people he worked with, they were all concerned about him and tried to keep him busy and keep him upbeat. But you know, after a full day's work, even if you're at it for 12 hours, when you come home to that empty house, it's an empty house. Yes. And, you know, like I said, eventually he got sick. He got pneumonia. I think he got out of the hospital way too soon. And I guess it all just kind of came to a head and did him in.
Very sad story on that. To lift things up a little bit, you have worked with some of the greatest in comic books. You are a great creator, collaborator in your own right. But who are some of your favorite people to work with? Who do you think you gel with the most?
My favorite inker in comics was Frank Giacoia. Okay. And so we worked on some covers together and stuff, and I really enjoyed working with him. I thought the stuff looked great. And I guess when you're working with one of your idols, that's a lot of fun. I did work 4 covers with John Romita Sr., and that would have been a dream job to have him ink a complete story of mine, but that never came about. But again, 2 great heroes. Working with Joe Sinnott for 22 years on the strip was phenomenal. I've worked with Tom Palmer, Keith Williams. There have been a number of really, really good people that somehow, their names escape me at the moment, but
sounds like a murderer's row.
But you know what? They know who they are.
All right, sir. Well, thank you so much for your time and all your insights.
Okay.
Thanks for stopping by the Last Comic Shop.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hey, this is Chad from the Last Comic Shop podcast here at Baltimore Comic Con with Ron Marz. Thanks for joining me, Ron. And so I know you primarily from your 90s Silver Surfer work, your 90s into the 2000s Green Lantern work. And I know you've done some things with CrossGen. I'm just hoping to talk to you a little bit about today about some of that stuff.
Sure.
Let's start with the Silver Surfer. What was your experience like following up Jim Starlin? You know, what made you want to go with the Heralds of Galactus and dive into that?
Well, Jim is the one who taught me how to do this, right? And Jim obviously was the one on Surfer before me and talked Marvel into turning the book over to me when he left to do Infinity Gauntlet, which seemed to work out pretty well for him.
Yeah.
So it was my on-the-job training. I was kind of learning how to write comics while I was writing comics, and my first gigs were Silver Surfer.
And your collaborator on that, which you recently teamed up with, was Ron Lim, who, for my money, still draws one of the best Silver Surfers in the business. What was it like working with him?
Ron was great. I mean, thankfully, he was a consummate professional, and I learned a lot about storytelling and how to do this job from working with him. Like, he would take my scripts and turn them into pages. And that learning process of seeing what I wrote and seeing what it turned into, was invaluable to get better at this. Couldn't have had a better creative partner on the book. And then they teamed us up again earlier this year for another Surfer story.
There you go. What was that like? Was it like falling back into the same routines, or?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, writing the first issue, the first half dozen pages or so, I haven't stretched these muscles in a long time. This is kind of weird. But very shortly, it was just like old times. And then especially when Ron's pages started coming in. And I was like, oh, I remember exactly what this is like.
Now, do you work full script, or do you go Marvel method, or somewhere in between, or what's your process?
Generally full script, but the full script is loose enough that, I want the artist to fully creatively involved in the process. And if that means they revise some stuff or add a panel, take away a panel, that's to me part of the process, and that's all good. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll write a full script, and the dialogue will be sort of placeholder dialogue.
Right.
And then when the art comes in, I go back in and completely rewrite the dialogue to fit what's on the page.
That sounds great. The best way for creative people to be creative is to let them create. So
yeah, well, ultimately that's what the job is. It's just making up stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's transition a little bit into Green Lantern. Now, you came on to Green Lantern at a very tumultuous time. You had the Parallax storyline, leading to Kyle. Can you talk a little bit about that experience? What was it like being thrust into one of those higher profile gigs?
Well, DC came to me and said, "Do you want to take over Green Lantern?" And I said, "Oh, sure, that'd be cool." Hal's basically like Chuck Yeager with a power ring. And
right.
I love that Gil Kane costume that he's in. And they're like, "Oh, yeah, well, we got something else in mind."
Oh, no.
So they gave me their page-and-a-half outline of what Emerald Twilight was supposed to be. The odds and ends of what story was, broad strokes.
Right.
And then they kind of left it in my lap to flesh it out and then to create a new Green Lantern. And we really didn't get any direction on what the new Green Lantern was supposed to be like or who it was supposed to be. So Darryl Banks and I just kind of made up Kyle from scratch and, really kind of patterned him after the everyman sort of character that you would get from Spider-Man.
Absolutely. And he served that role not only throughout your book, but in the Justice League and all those different incarnations. And
yeah, it was a time at DC where the legacy characters like Kyle and like Wally West had sort of taken over the books. That's one of the differences between Marvel and DC, at least in that era, was that the Marvel characters were pretty much what they were. DC characters had gone through a number of different iterations from the Golden Age into the current age, and Kyle was kind of the next one in line.
Now, I do have to ask, just because I have you here, you were partially responsible for like a word, a term, the refrigerating, which came up in She-Hulk recently.
Not even partially responsible, I think completely responsible, except for, Gail Simone is actually the one that coined the term.
Right.
And obviously I'm friends with Gail, so there's no bad blood or anything there. But yeah, it was, completely valid criticism. It's funny, at the time, I was not thinking of what everybody else compares it to is the death of Gwen Stacy in Spider-Man. I wasn't thinking of Gwen Stacy at all, and I'm not even sure that I had read that issue of Spider-Man by the time I was writing Green Lantern.
Oh, wow.
I was totally thinking of Uncle Ben. I mean, to me, it was meant to be much more of an Uncle Ben moment than a Gwen Stacy moment, but obviously the parallels are completely valid.
No, absolutely. And it's tough because on one hand, it is a tool in the writer's toolbox to take a character off the table like that.
Well,
I mean, sometimes you get misconstrued. Or,
certainly in superhero comics and superhero comics that are, have a legacy to them, like Marvel and DC books. To a great extent, the heroes don't change.
It's the illusion.
It's the illusion of change. And if you want something permanent or something tragic, something's going to happen to one of the supporting characters because, your main character doesn't end up dead. So it's sort of part and parcel of serialized fiction that the main characters, the featured characters, just keep recurring. They just keep coming back. If you're going to take somebody off the table, it's got to be a supporting character.
Right. But hey, being known, even if it's an infamy sometimes, is it's good to be known.
I guess better infamous than ignored.
Now, speaking of things that were infamous, you were part of the grand cross-gen experiment.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that, what that was like?
In the long run, it was like every other comic. We were making comics.
Right.
We just happened to work in the same office. So it was sort of the myth of the Marvel bullpen brought to life.
Right.
Because most everybody that worked for the company lived in Tampa, Florida. Most everybody worked in the office. We had, it was like having a 9-to-5 job, but your 9-to-5 happened to be making comics. And so in that respect, it was great. We were staff employees. We got sick time and vacation time and 401k and health benefits and all that stuff. So we had a
real job.
We had a grown up job, but we were making comics.
Was it fun? What was that?
Yeah, I mean, it was generally fun. Creatively, it was pretty great, at least for me and a number of the people that I was working with. We enjoyed the collaborative nature of being in the same place. We could sit down and kick ideas around and go out to lunch and plot where the series were headed. You know, it was creatively fulfilling, I think. Probably more so for some people than others. I think some people, don't function well in a group setting like that.
Sometimes, with creative people, they just want to be left alone.
They want to be left alone. So there were both ends of that spectrum, but I think overall we had a good time. I think overall pretty proud of the comics that came out of there. Obviously, business-wise, it turned out to be not a lasting kind of thing. We spent too much money and didn't bring enough money in.
Right. It's a shame, though. I felt like if given more time, you guys could have really.
Yeah. Well, we certainly we expanded too much. It was too much too soon. And, the initial thought for the place was that if we didn't make dime one, the company could fund itself for 5 years. That was the promise that we were all given when we took the job. But unfortunately, a lot of the boss's wealth was tied up in the .com boom. So when that crashed, half of his money went away overnight.
Yikes.
So suddenly that 5-year window was not a real thing anymore. And by that point, we had expanded too much and hired on too many people, had too much overhead to really be able to recover.
Well, let's get back into current day stuff. Now, we already talked about Silver Surfer Rebirth, where you reteamed with Ron Lim. I noticed you've got a Kickstarter going with Daryl Banks. Do you want to talk about that at all?
The Kickstarter is actually a guy named Michael Katz, who's a lawyer and comic fan and writer, created this concept called Riot Earp, which is kind of outer space cops, basically.
Okay.
And a mutual friend put me in touch with Mike, because Mike was looking for somebody to be his editor on this series. And so I took on the gig of editing his series for him. And then he said, "Hey, would you be willing to write like a special for this with my characters?" And I said, "Sure." And we talked about artists, and he's like, "Do you think Daryl Banks would actually draw this?" And I'm like, "Well, probably." And obviously the biggest part of the allure there is, Daryl and I getting to work together again.
Very cool.
Just the same as with Ron Lim, when you work with somebody that long over that period of time, you get real comfortable. It's like it's like being an old married couple.
There you go.
So anytime we can go back to that and I can work with those guys, it's just a delight.
All right, and one last thing, I'll get you out of here on this one. I notice you're teaching classes. I'm an educator myself, only I deal with 8th graders. But you're teaching how to write comics?
Yeah, I teach a how to write comics course for a place called the Jacob Kruger Studio in Manhattan. The courses are online, and so it's basically a 4-week boot camp that teaches you how to write comics.
Any
by the
free
end of
advice for our listeners?
Well, the thing that opens the session is that comics are frozen moments in time, and they are, I think, the hardest kind of writing you can do. It's harder than screenplays. It's harder than prose. It's harder than nonfiction. Because you have to bring so many different skill sets to it. You have to understand how the page works, understand how the visuals work, and be able to communicate that to your artist. And then on top of that, obviously, you have just the drama stuff of being able to tell a story. So it's not the easiest thing to learn, but I teach this course a few times a year, and I've had a number of people that have come through the course and then gone on to make their own comics, and that's hugely satisfying that you can help somebody get to that next point in their development.
Yeah, to bring it full circle like Jim Starlin did for you back in the day.
The frozen moment in timeline is one I stole from Jim Starlin. So
very cool. Well, thank you so much for your time today. These frozen moments in time, I appreciate it. Our Last Comic Shop listeners appreciate it, and we hope you have a great show, and best wishes for future success.
Thanks, Chad. My pleasure.
And we are back. Yes, Ron Marz. I am jealous. So glad to see him link up again with Ron Lim and put out, for me, classic Silver Surfer in Silver Surfer Rebirth.
Wait. Ron Lim, is it reprinting old stuff or is it new stuff?
New stuff. I mean, it's a bit of a retread because you get Jack of Hearts, you get Legacy, you get Thanos, you get all the old characters coming back, but it is new storylines, new art, new Silver Surfer. They kind of just ignored the whole Silver Surfer Black thing. They definitely ignored the Dan Slott, Mike Allred Silver Surfer completely. Thank God. And it's
Yeah, people didn't like that. That was from what
people
I
loved it. They loved it if they weren't Silver Surfer fans.
Those people are just JA. It was
JA, that's his shirt. I didn't like this run. Everybody else. Anyways, long story short, we got one more interview from Baltimore Comic-Con. It's right after these commercial breaks. It was with Greg LaRocque, who did one of the best Flash runs ever.
Being a PI, you learn fast what seems like a normal case never is. You never realize how much you're going to need your friends. You can never guess how near your enemies are. And you never know who to trust. Now I'm chasing down an ancient artifact, the only thing that can stop this newly unearthed terror. It sounds crazy, but I'm not thinking how nuts it all is. All I can think about is the only man who's ever managed to grab my heart is right at the heart of this mystery. And why? Every time my heart gets involved in anything, there's always a monster waiting in the shadows to break it.
Ripped from the pages of the self-titled comic book comes Dash, a new queer supernatural noir podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Podcast Dash, on Instagram at dash.noir, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, we're here at Baltimore Comic-Con, and we're talking with Greg LaRocque. And thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day, sir.
Yeah. Hi, everybody.
And the one question that I always start off with, I'm sure that you were a comic book fan growing up a little bit. I mean, that's probably why you...
I was a comic book fan growing up.
So my main question is, and it's the first softball of the day.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember the first comic book that you got? Or the one that you, like, maybe not the first one you got, but, like, this was the one that, like, the most memorable from my childhood that, like, kind of like,
yes.
yeah.
I had read comic books.
Okay.
Right? The ones that I liked were basically like used books because I didn't even have access to like new comic book stores.
Okay.
You know, back in the day, there wasn't comic book stores. So the books that I was reading was that I liked. I remember was Superboy and Legion of Superheroes.
Okay.
Right.
So that was all the Otto Bender stuff, or
Kurt Swan.
Okay.
You know, that would be early '60s. But what changed me and then got me to be the comic book fanatic was Fantastic Four #1.
All right.
Just like everybody else, I read that book and it changed my life.
Okay.
It was so different. The stuff I had been reading before, you know, the final panel when the torch flies off and it's just like such a dramatic thing. It was like, wow, what is this? You know, they don't do this kind of stuff in comic books. These are the good guys.
Yeah.
So right after that, I just, like I said, I became a fanatic, started collecting, had pretty much everything Marvel put out over the next dozen years.
Wow.
Yeah, I was a Marvel maniac. I used to save my lunch money, collected, you know, the Coke bottles that you used to trade in for like 2 cents.
So you were a member of the Merry Marvel Marching Society.
Marvel Marching Society, yes.
Is that
march along.
So is that ultimately why you wanted to work for Marvel? Like, I mean, I guess that's my next question is like, so now you were a comic book fan.
Yeah.
How did you translate that into being, you know, doing that for a career, I guess?
Well, I was always interested in art before comic books.
Okay.
I was the guy in school that got all the art projects. Before I got into comic books, I used to take like the Sunday paper. They had like a TV guide. I forget what it was called, TV something or another.
Right.
Parade magazine. And they would have a cover of a celebrity or sports figure. So every Sunday I would take those pictures out of the magazine and just trace them or try to draw them.
Yes.
You know, I think I was doing that before I could walk.
Okay.
I was born with a pencil in my hand.
Oh yeah, and it's amazing because like we've been doing this for a little while, and it seems like all the really great artists at some point got started by doing tracing. I was reading a really great book about even in the 1920s, 30s, like people like Will Eisner or folks like that, they would get like butcher paper that they would, pack meat in, and they would put it down over the Sunday funnies, and they would just trace it. And
I used to do it with wax paper.
So there
wax
you go.
paper, it's transparent. It doesn't look like anything, but you're getting a little bit of education where things go. And
So who was one of your favorite persons to sketch or trace, or did you just trace anything you could get your hands on?
Anything and anybody.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Did you like Jack Kirby? Did you like Steve Ditko's more art, or were back in the day? Did you?
I was a big Marvel guy. I loved the Fantastic Four, but for me, the Kirby work that I just loved was the Thor work.
Okay.
Yeah, Vince Coletta, for me, I think was the best inker over Kirby. Most people are going to say Sinnott.
Right.
But I go with Coletta. I love Thor. And I was really ecstatic when my very first work for DC, as far as superhero goes, was OMAG, and Vince Coletta was my inker.
Oh,
yeah. When I came
wow.
over to Marvel, he inked my graphic novel, The Aladdin Effect.
Right.
And a couple Spider-Man issues. You know, so yeah, it was really cool to grow up admiring these guys and loving their work, and then start working for Marvel, and boom.
Well, one of the questions, I just read The Aladdin Effect just recently, I just revisited it, and I was curious about that book. It was written by Jim Shooter.
Yeah.
And was that, because it's really about like 4 super heroines at the time.
Uh-huh.
Was there a potential pitch for like a series that would continue using those characters for a while?
No, I don't think it was.
No,
I think
it was
like
just
a
like
standalone type of
he
thing.
was just wanted to include 4 of them. And what was the story behind that particular?
I was doing month-to-month stuff for Marvel, doing films, basically. I might have started Power Man and Iron Fist, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But here's the story on that graphic novel. I was in the office. I think I was sitting next with Danny Fingeroff doing something, so I was probably doing Spider-Man at the time. Vince Coletta, again, pops his head in.
Okay.
All right, he says, Jim Shooter wants to meet with you, right? He's going to offer you either a mini-series or a graphic novel.
Okay.
He says, pick the graphic novel because I'm going to work with you. I'm going to ink you on it.
Wow.
Okay? So fine. I go into the office later on. I meet with Jim Shooter. He says, I got 2 projects for you. You want to do a miniseries? You want to do a graphic novel? So I had already talked to Vince. I said, well, I'll take the graphic novel.
Okay.
Graphic novel, it was the early, stages of graphic novels. So it was kind of like a prestige thing. It's not another comic book.
Right.
No problems. I took the graphic novel. I was happy to do that. But it turned out that the miniseries that he offered me was Secret Wars.
No.
So I turned down Secret Wars.
Wow. Well, you gave Mike Zeck some work, I guess.
I was going to say, and you've had your opportunities with plenty of work that's still well loved and well renowned.
Yes.
Now, 2 things stand out for me from your library of work you've done. It's your Spider-Man work, whether it was on Marvel Team Up or Web of Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like to be involved with the black costume era? And you have some of those great early pre-Venom symbiote stories.
Yeah, sure. It was great. I mean, it was such a strange time that, they were even thinking of changing Spider-Man.
Right.
Of course, it was all fake out. But, drawing Spider-Man was a big opportunity for me. I was very happy to do the book.
Prefer the black or the red costume whenever you had your opportunity?
The red.
The classic?
Yeah. Actually, the black costume, I guess Zeck was the one who designed it.
Okay.
But my very first attempt at drawing that, they had me redraw it.
Oh?
Because I put in too much definition. They wanted to look black. But just to give you an idea how I wanted to draw the book. But you see there's a lot more muscle showing, a lot more definition. Kind of like the old black boat,
Oh, yeah.
And it was like they nixed that. So that's not the costume, so.
Very cool. But in your Spider-Man run, you're also known for Assistant Editors Month. Can you talk a little bit about Golden Oldie?
I'm going to tell you the absolute highlight of my career.
Okay.
Forget the books I've worked on, the money I've made, the praise I get at the convention and stuff like this. The absolute highlight of my career was when I did Marvel Team Up. That would have been issue 139.
Okay.
Because this is 2 months later. But after I did that, Golden Oldie, which was the Assistant Editors Month.
Which, explain for the audience, what happened? Who is Golden Oldie?
Golden Oldie is Aunt May. It was Assistant Editors Month, where the entire lineup of Marvel books that month was turned over to the assistant editor to do whatever they wanted to do. Mike Carlin came up with the story of what if Aunt May became the Herald of Galactus. He gave her powers, and she was then Golden Oldie. So I drew her up and had her looking sexy,
Sexy Aunt May.
Some fan had got such a tickle out of it that they wrote in a fan letter.
Okay.
Right? And it's in this Marvel number 141. So this book right here, if you could hold this, is my absolute favorite book ever. It's the highlight of my career. I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to ask you guys to read it.
Okay.
All celebrity voices are poorly impersonated.
Hey, Bob! Aunt May vs. Galactus was a doozy. Golden Oldie knocked me out. If her figure is really all that sexy, look out, Red Sonja. No wonder Doc Ock once dated her. Cost a couple of no prizes at Michael and Greg. Loved it. Your boy Stan.
Wow. Nothing like getting a fan letter from Stan
Official no prize. Yes, in print. So this is the highlight of my career.
That's wonderful.
That is wonderful.
It is. It's great.
Yeah.
How many times have you written a fan letter? I don't know.
Did you get to meet Stan at all?
I met Stan one time. We were in Chicago at a convention, He was floating around in the room. I was with my buddy Scott Lobdell. We saw the crowd partying, and of course his head is like, a head above everybody else as he's coming. And he and Scott are very good buddies, and I had not met him at all. So, him and Scott hooked up for a little bit, started talking. I was just like hanging on the side. And all of a sudden Stan looks at me and says, "Who are you?" I said, "Well, I'm Greg. I'm a friend of Scott's." He says, "Okay, I won't hold that against you." Pretty much that was my entire conversation with him. I didn't even introduce myself as an artist or anything.
Oh, wow.
But it was nice. We hung out for a little bit, had a nice little conversation.
That's awesome. While we have you, I want to shift to DC and just your work on The Flash with Mark Waid.
Okay.
The story where Barry Allen comes back.
Yes.
And it's, spoiler alert, it's a feint. But man, did that story cement Wally West and his legacy. Can you talk about that? What that meant to you? What it was like to work on that?
Yeah, no pun intended, but I had a long run on The Flash. Started with Bill Loebs, loved working with Bill. And I can remember meeting with Bill, and one of the first things I asked him is really, how much of an asshole do you think Wally really is? Because they wrote him as just like this terrible person early on. And he says, well, I'm going to make him pretty bad because what we're going to do is we're going to build him up. We're going to make him a man. So I guess my run was 4 or 5 years on that book. I did a lot of
really lengthy run.
Yeah. I think it's one of the times where comic books got it right. And it was all about the character of the guy. And the fans got to know Wally, and to see him actually go from being that starstruck, kind of like a rock star superhero, to grow, learn a little more responsibility, treat women better, and become a man. So then when Mark took over, it was like, now's the time to really he's ready to do it. Okay. So that was the one, Return of Barry Allen, where he basically earned his Flash. If you remember in the story, it was Jay Garrick who stopped calling him Junior and started calling him Flash. So that was the moment where he stepped into manhood.
Yeah, he finally became his own man. That was a story. It was my first Flash story that I read back as a kid. And boy, it set me as a Flash fan for life. That was just so great. I'm still rooting for Wally to this day.
And of course, we all know that Wally West is the true Flash.
Oh, yeah.
All the others are posers.
Oh, yeah. No, it's true. I mean, the fact that they brought Barry Allen back recently, it's so sad because, that just overshadowed all of that great character development that you got from Wally West. Yeah. I mean, you're right. They did the comic book character right. They took their time with him. They made him grow and earn his stripes the right way. And so, yeah, you're not going to get any arguments from either Chad or I that Wally West.
I love it when fans come up and they talk to me about the books and the characters like they really know them. I feel like I've done my job right. We've done our job, correctly when they can really connect.
Absolutely. And that's what great stories do. You're a great storyteller.
Fantastic.
And when it comes to one last question I have, and it's always another slow ball question, but it's in regards to your work as a storyteller, and you're working with different writers and things like that. What kind of method do you like as an art? Do you like full scripts? Do you like just outlines? Do you like to add a little bit more of your color to it?
I hate full scripts.
Okay.
Yeah, it's much better to work with a plot synopsis. When I worked with Bill Loebs on Flash, sometimes his script was maybe a page long.
Okay.
Just basically tell me what happens in the story. I'll pick out locations, I'll expand what I want to expand, decrease what I want to expand, and just, he left it up to me to understand what he wanted to tell and allow me to illustrate it. Mark, on the other hand, he just, 5 panels. This is what I want in each panel. It's fine working that way. He had a very distinct look, or vision of what he wanted, so I was happy to, just give him what he wanted. But I really prefer, having the ability to, spread my wings and flex my muscles and just get in there and contribute a little bit more.
Right, yeah.
I think it makes the work so much better.
It does. It makes it more of a collaboration. I mean, again, both sides are very, very important, but you get to, again, spread your wings as a storyteller.
Yes.
You get to...
But I'm the guy who starts with a blank page. I have a script, which is typewritten stuff, but I have a blank page, and I have to make, like you say, it's storytelling. You have to make what he has in words work in pictures. And oftentimes they, will ask you to do things, and maybe there's a step there's missing, or maybe there's 2 or 3 steps you need to combine. Denny O'Neil taught me everything I need to know about comic books. Not everything I need to know, but maybe the most important thing. And he said to look at the story and think of it as a joke. Because at the end of the story, at the end of the page, you have a punchline, you have a payoff. So make sure what you're doing is setting up that payoff, the punchline in the end.
Oh, very
That's what
good
storytelling's about.
Words from Denny O'Neil, the late, great Denny O'Neil.
Yeah.
The last question, and I promise this is the last one.
This one was the last.
You talked about Vince Coletta.
Yeah.
How you liked him. Is there any other inkers that you really enjoyed working with over the years?
I enjoyed working with all my inkers. I mean, some have been, better than others. I'm not going to say who's better, who's not. There's a bunch of guys I haven't been able to work with. One of the guys is here today, Mike Grell. Whenever they would ask, who do I want to ink me, Grell would be on the list, Bob McLeod would be on the list, Rubenstein would be on the list, Klaus Hansen, all these top guys.
Yeah.
But they didn't. They didn't send them my direction.
That's okay.
There's still time.
You know what? I'm glad that you came our direction. Thank you so much, Greg, for taking some time to talk to the Last Comic Shop fans, and we'll see you in the funny pages.
Thank you, guys.
All right, that was our great interview with Greg LaRocque, and I hope that you liked the poor impersonation of Stan Lee that Mikey Wood interjected when we were talking about the letter that Greg was very proud of. I hope you all enjoyed that. By the way, where is Mikey? We haven't seen him since the opening segment.
We lost him behind a big stack of Hard Corpse #1.
One of those, quite possibly a gold cover.
Oh, my goodness. You could
he was ironing. I think he's ironing back there somewhere.
You could get a whole nickel for that issue. In any case, one thing that you can get absolutely free is more episodes of The Last Comic Shop, and you do that by going out to www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com. It's a terrific website where you can get all of our episodes, including all of these past episodes from Baltimore Comic Con. We finally wrapped up all of those interviews, but we've got at least 4 more shows, plus shows with interviews from Three Rivers Con, plus a show with an interview by folks like Ben Morse and Kaylin Smith and Kelly Thompson and Meredith McLaren, all these great comic book talents dropping by the shop to give you awesome comic book stories. So yeah, continue to listen to our show. And if you love some of these comic books that all these comic book creators are putting out and you need places to put them, like bags and boards and boxes, make sure that you're going out to bcwsupplies.com today and using promo code LCSPOD. It will save you 10% off your order, which you can then use to buy more comics, which you then can buy more bags for, which you can then buy more boxes for, which you can then use the promo code again to get 10% off your order. That promo code LCSPOD, a part of every single sale, goes to the Last Comic Shop to support our mission to bring comic books to you.
That's right. The more you buy, the more you save. Somehow.
And the more we get a piece of, which really, once you got your books and they're bagged and they're boarded and they're protected and all that, you might actually want to talk about them. So check us out on the socials. We are available all across the board at Last Comic Shop. And if you need to find us, you can always go back to the home base, which is our website, www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com, where people can find all sorts of fun things. Like what, J.A.?
We've got a link to our merch store. So if you've got all your bags and your boards and you need something to carry them in, get a tote bag. Buy yourself a T-shirt. You need a coffee mug? We've got that too. We've got it all covered over at the Last Comic Shop merch store.
Yeah. All your luggage for your next Comic-Con trip.
That's how J.A. is going to get back for the next Comic-Con. He's going to ship himself in a steamer trunk. He's going to put some UPS stamps on it and poke a couple air holes. Make sure you do it this time, because the last time...
last time I forgot the air holes, and it got a little dicey there towards the end.
And you smelled.
Oh, yes. Well, no, I didn't smell. Everyone else could smell me.
Well, one thing that doesn't smell is our show. We hope it doesn't stink, and we hope that you come back next week. Until then, I'm the host with the most, Andy Larson. I was joined by my regular co-host, Jay Scott and Chad Smith, as well as Mikey Wood. He's somewhere taking out the trash so it doesn't smell in this place, I guess. Until next week, stay safe, stay clean, and remember that talking to folks is always a good way to use your voice. It's better than yelling. It's better than crying. Definitely better than laughing at them. Because a lot of people, they'll just punch you for that.
What are you talking about? Who's been punching you? Point to the doll.
The Last Comic Shop was a 2023 Black Angus production.